Hi Hank, hi SciShow team, welcome everyone. I'm Kristine and I do both knitting and science. My community has summoned me to react to this knitting video of yours and I'm about to make it everybody's problem. I've never done a react video before though, so let's see.
One of the oldest knit objects in the world is a sock that's about 800 years old.
Oh yeah, the incredible 12th century cotton sock from Egypt. It is a gorgeous display of technology and exquisite craftsmanship.
It was a simple thing, a pattern of knots in the shape of a cylinder with a bend toward the end for the heel.
Wait, simple? Knots? Hank, are you talking about the null-bound socks from Egypt from around the 3rd to 5th century? Those aren't knitted. They are made with a different yarn manipulation technique called null binding that uses a single needle to make knots that eventually make up a fabric. And yes, null binding makes knots, but knitting and to some extent crochet makes loops and can be unraveled. A knot cannot. Still amazing craftsmanship though. Look at how tiny those stitches are.
Now perhaps knitting doesn't fill you to the brim with excitement. I get this.
Way to alienate the knitters in your audience with that one, of which I am one.
But you know who is excited about knitting? Physicists. Because by decoding the patterns of stitches that create different shapes, they can figure out how to knit all kinds of complex 3D fabrics.
Oh yeah, like the Aymara indigenous women in Bolivia who are able to use their crafting skills passed down through the generations to weave tiny metal tubes that help children born with a hole in their heart, and whose dexterity just cannot be replaced by machines. They are just that skilled. Or the experienced seamstresses at the International Latex Company who ended up being essential to the spacesuits that brought the first humans to the moon. Crafts are amazing. So much technology and dexterity in their hands.
And I'm not talking about fancy toe socks.
Wait. That almost makes it sound as if manipulating spun thread into a 3D shape is not an impressive piece of engineering and technology, and the reference to toe socks makes me almost certain that you are referring to the red null-bound socks, which, sorry to tell you, wrong technique and wrong century.
In the 800 years since that sock was made, knitting has spread everywhere. In fact, you're probably wearing a knit fabric right now. T-shirts, sweaters, socks, underwear, basically anything made from a stretchy fabric is probably knitted.
First of all, those shirts you are showing are almost certainly woven and not knitted. But also, yeah, most modern stretchy fabrics are knitted, but only because many of the other crafts we have engaged in were too difficult for machines to replicate. Crafts like null binding and crochet, which uses a single handheld tool and work by constantly shifting how you are holding the crafted item, as well as having to aim into the right stitch each and every time, are examples of crafts that we humans are very skilled at, but machines not so much. Too much dexterity and hand-to-eye coordination involved.
And making these fabrics is simple, at least in theory. All you do is create loops in a piece of string and pull one loop through the next, one row at a time.
I've yet to hear anyone who's tried to learn knitting as an adult call the process simple. There's a lot that goes on before the process gets stored in your so-called muscle memory. I can't really comment to that myself because my grandmother taught me how to knit when I was still in single digits, and I've kind of forgotten how it was in the beginning, but I hear a lot of stories of how much people struggled until they finally cracked the knitting code.
You can either pull the loop from the back to the front to create a little V shape, which is the knit stitch, or from front to back to make a little bump, which is called a purl stitch. Knit and purl are the two basic stitches that make up the vast majority of all knitting, and you can mix and match the two of them to create all kinds of fun fabrics.
We also do intentional increases and decreases of stitches, both to make the 3D shape we are creating conform better to what we are making, and to create elaborate patterns with holes and angled shapes. I am not sure I agree with you that the vast majority of knitting is made up only of knit and purl stitches.
It's actually a little like programming, but with yarn.
No, it is programming, but with yarn. So much like programming is knitting that it was used during World War II to transmit information. Knitters would sit innocently in a park or by a window and intentionally knit, purl, or drop stitches to create a fabric that could convey essential information to those who could read it. Let's also not forget that even programming itself has its origins in textile crafts and the automation of the complex patterns used by jacquard weaving looms. It was the incredibly labor-intensive work of producing textiles that kick-started the Industrial Revolution and programming in the first place. Crafts and technology have always been closely intertwined and essential to human development, so much so that many of the words and expression of our language today come from textile craft terms. Many parts of the earth would be too inhospitable if not for the invention of spinning and the various technologies that turn spun thread into wearable fabrics that can protect us from the forces of nature.
You have two kinds of inputs, and you can combine them in an endless number of ways to make fabrics that look and behave totally differently. Certain patterns of stitches naturally like to curve in specific ways, and they do this consistently. For instance, if you make anything with all knit stitches on its front side called stockinette stitch, the top and bottom will curl toward you, while the sides will curl away.
Yeah, you probably got enough comments on this already, but just for clarity, that is the back of a piece of stockinette, also called reverse stockinette if you intended the back to be what you show to the world. The front looks smooth, like this.
But even though centuries of knitters figured out how to make all sorts of patterns through trial and error, how it all works was mostly a mystery. I mean, why do certain patterns of knits and purls create folds and zigzags or rolls? The answer, of course, lies in physics.
Sorry to talk about the elephant in the room, but you are vastly underestimating and sadly falling into the fallacy of undervaluing the incredible skills and experience of often generations of, traditionally, women, knitters and crafters with just this one paragraph. Although some trial and error is of course at play when inventing new technology, and yes, knitting is a human technology, a lot of what comes after is skill and experience. I mean, just look at this sock again, one of the earliest examples that we know of so far that is knitted. This is not an inexperienced knitter's work. This is not a child idling their time away while minding the livestock. I would venture a guess that the early knitting technology had been developed at least a couple of centuries before this masterpiece. You don't wake up one day, pick up some sticks, and plan intricate patterns like these, I assure you. Also, what is science, if not trial and error?
Ultimately, the yarn settles into the position where it's under the least amount of tension. In other words, it relaxes into the lowest possible energy configuration, just like a ball coming to rest at the bottom of a driveway. That's why once you have made your stitches, you can stretch out the fabric however you want, but the tension in the fabric will generally pull it back into its original shape.
That is not the whole story, though. You also have blocking, where you soak your wool item in warm soapy water to help the wool unlock some of their many hydrogen bonds so that they more easily settle into those positions where they are under the least amounts of tension. This can also make more freshly knitted wool items less itchy, which is always a plus. There is also, especially alpaca wool, which to many knitters' chagrin, has a tendency to stretch over time, making what was supposed to be a knit sweater more of a tunic. Still warm though.
And usually that original shape is not perfectly flat.
I don't know, Hank. This seems pretty flat to me. Although, if you are talking physics, and for something to be considered perfectly flat, I would perhaps argue that no organic material would be perfectly flat if you just zoomed in far enough.
For instance, you have probably seen clothes with ridges like this, especially around the wrists or neckline. This is called ribbing, and it's made with alternating columns of knit and purl stitches, which curl in opposite directions. Ribbing is best for parts of a garment that need to be really stretchy but also come back to their original shape, which is why it's the perfect thing for necklines and sleeve cuffs.
It also prevents the stockinette, if the rest of your sweater is plain stockinette, from curling in on yourself, which you yourself mentioned at one point as one of the issues of stockinette. Multipurpose for the win.
So, manipulating the order of stitches and the force fields that they generate is part of how you get a specific property in a garment. But knit patterns get much more complex than that. All of these fabrics, with their ridges and zigzags and bubbles, were made of some combination of knit and purl stitches. Now, for centuries, knitting was more of an art than a science, but then the physicists showed up.
Yeah, this just doesn't sound good. It reads as though us frivolous women folk and all sorts of other knitting folks were just playing around with colored string in our free time until the proper, logic-minded, and usually male, physicists showed up. In other words, this perpetuates subconscious gender biases. Yep, we are about to get feminism mixed into this because these attitudes fall in line with how we are subconsciously taught that jobs or products made by women are worth less than crafts or skills associated more traditionally with men, even when similar amounts of time and effort has been dedicated to a thing. We crafters, and especially those of us who engage in crafts traditionally associated with women, know painfully well how soft crafts like knitting and weaving are often seen as just something to keep your hands busy these days, or I was going to knit anyway, so I'm only going to charge the price of the yarn. Problematic attitudes. Go to any craft fair close to you and compare prices between those who felt sew, knit, weave, or crochet with those who do wood turning, knife making, or blacksmithing. While you're at it, ask them how long a few of their items took to make. I dare you. And I know that there are plenty of amazing physicists out in the world who just so happen to be women, just as there are many amazing knitters who just happen to be men or gender non-conforming badasses, but I think you would agree that my point still stands. These stereotypes are sticky things to get rid of.
There's a little bit of tug of war here, because that force field created by all of the knots makes the fabric want to curve to reduce tension. But as soon as fabric curves, it also begins to stretch, which creates tension. In its natural state, a fabric is balancing out these two sources of tension so that overall it's as relaxed as possible. Logical enough. But these researchers needed a way to model all of this.
You mean they needed to translate what a lot of experienced knitters know already into cold, hard numbers and mechanistic explanations that we would accept as science and technology today. Similar to how the International Latex Company, which was mentioned earlier, who helped create the first functional spacesuits. They had the same issue. The skilled sewists who worked with experience and dexterity and had previously been working on making women's underwear, much to NASA technicians' chagrin, had to figure out a way to communicate with NASA's team of people who were more used to detailed technical drawings full of data than pattern drafting and thread. In the end, the company actually ended up hiring a team of engineers to be both buffer and translator between NASA and the sewists. This gave the NASA team the technical drawings and engineering jargon that they were used to, while the sewists, who never used the aforementioned technical drawings, did their job. You can read that story and more in The Golden Thread by Cassia St. Clair, who can tell you a lot more about the technology and history of thread if you are so interested. And not sponsored, just a well-written and thoroughly enjoyable book, especially if you don't think textile crafts are technology.
The surprising thing is that the bends in the fabric don't always happen along the lines where you switch from knit stitches to purl. So it's actually really hard to predict instinctively what a certain stitch pattern will end up looking like. But this model can do that. Now that's cool and all, but you might not want to make a sweater out of these patterns, and that's okay, because scientists have much bigger plans.
Maybe it's just the vibe of the video affecting me so far, but this sounds again like you are severely underestimating just what an amazing piece of human technology knitting is, compared to the amazing, complex, and groundbreaking stuff physicists and data models can do. Come on, SciShow, you can do so much better than this.
We've been good at sweaters for a while. Honestly, what are we going to do there? They're already great. But by programming knitted fabrics to have specific properties, you can design sheets of material that can do basically whatever you want. One potential property of fabric that researchers are especially interested in is self-folding, a property of fabric that naturally forms ridges or creases like this. Now, self-folding isn't necessarily very complex. Ribbing is actually a kind of self-folding. So soon, knitted materials might not just be keeping us warm, but also protecting packages, absorbing noise, and helping doctors monitor their patients' bodies. And what all this goes to show is that modern science isn't the only way of developing sophisticated technology. Knitting evolved purely through intuition and trial and error, but those knit patterns that emerged from generations of knitters tipped off scientists that there might be something useful here.
Because keeping you warm, wicking the sweat away from your body to keep you cool, or creating a chimney effect in hot, arid climates as your own personal ventilation outfit were not already useful enough? I'm sorry, Hank. Sorry, SciShow, but you are kinda proving your own title here. You do not understand why or how knitting works. Thank you for watching this a very different video from what I typically do. If you are new here, welcome. I am an environmental chemist turned textile crafts and science educator in these parts. We make fun stuff and share the, at times, pretty depressing state of oversight and legislation in the textile industry, or lack thereof. Or, as one of our community members put it, I hope you had a great day because I'm about to ruin it. With references in the description box below as per usual. Thank you, as always, to our lovely patrons who help make this channel possible. I hope you will stick around for more sciencey and crafty shenanigans to come. Bye! Hi, have you come to help? Yes, you are. No. Headphone cables are not snacks. We've talked about this.